Welcome to the Jacob's Talk Show. My name is Jacob Stevens. It's wonderful to have you with us today. So this is my second episode of my podcast, in which I pretty much talk about whatever is on my mind at the time. And this show, as you see in the description, is dedicated to country music. Country music is my favorite type of music. Those of you who are listening on YouTube will note that I have some videos up on YouTube where I'm singing country music. This form of music dates way back to, far back as I can trace it, to the 1800s. At that point, it wasn't the country music we know today. It was more a folk type of music, bluegrass type style. There was no drums, no steel guitar, no fiddle. It was all acoustic at that time. At this time, there wasn't really wasn't too commercial. It was more stuff that you would play on your back porch and in your family, to entertain families. So if you jump forward back to 1925, which is a good time forward from this, the Grand Ole Opry debuted. It was originally called a barn dance. It was not originally called the Grand Ole Opry. George D. Hay, who was this WSM's first programming director, took note of things that was going on and what people liked on the station. The demand was so great in the early days of the Grand Ole Opry that they had to move from different studios to accommodate it, to where finally, in 1945, they moved to the Ryman Auditorium, which was probably the most famous home of the Grand Ole Opry. Then, in 1974, downtown was becoming crime-ridden, and the Ryman Auditorium was pretty well in decay. They were afraid to even turn the lights on and afraid that the place would catch fire. So, in 1974, they commissioned to build the Grand Ole Opry House, which is where it currently is. Over the years, it has seen different iterations of it. Now it's probably one of the most modern theaters in the world to do any kind of show. As it stands right now, the Grand Ole Opry is the longest running radio show in the world, having first broadcast in 1925. So then we move forward. And, well, around that time, bluegrass was heard on the Grand Ole Opry. Bill Monroe, who had been trying to experiment with different sounds, finally found one that he liked when in 1945 he hired Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs. And then, not long after that, Hank Williams appeared and did 7 encores on the Grand Ole Opry, when in that day and time, encores were unheard of. And I think someone said, some people say 6, some people say 7. But nonetheless, he was a big hit. But it came a point to where in the 50s, he was either not showing up for shows or showing up drunk. And they had a strict policy, is you had to appear so many times a year or you were dropped from the cast. And in 1951, I think it was, he was dropped from the Opry cast. So then we jump into the 60s, where Patsy Cline, Cowboy Copas, and some other Opry stars were killed in a plane crash in 1963. There's been a lot of people saying, how would Patsy, how long she would have been around. She had a wonderful voice, and a lot of female country singers, even to this day, cite her as an inspiration. So then we go into the 70s, where you have the outlaw movement took place. This was, there's several people that did this, but the main ones you think of is Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and Tom Paul Glazier. They did an album called Wanted, The Outlaws, which sold more copies than any other album had in the country scene up until this point. Then we jump into the 80s, which is the urban cowboy movie, or the pop craze. People like Johnny Lee, Charlie Daniels Band, Mickey Gilley, and others were instrumental in that sound. But a lot of people didn't like that because it wasn't, true country music in their words. So then you had people like Randy Travis that was pure country and shook up the industry. And then you have people in 1989 that came about that are well-known names today. Garth Brooks and Alan Jackson first came on the scene in 1989. And then you go into the 90s, where it's probably the biggest, where the country music became the biggest. You have people like Rhett Adkins, David Lee Murphy, Ty Herndon, and others that were instrumental in the 90s country sound. You have also people like Sammy Kershaw and Aaron Tippin. And there was a mixture of different kinds of country, and probably the most pop sound of that era was Shania Twain. Then you go into the 2000s, and country kind of lost its way in a lot of people's minds. You had people like Jason Aldean that came on the scene and done a rock sound, which a lot of country purists say that he's not country, he's rock, and he shouldn't be in the country scene. So that kind of gives you a little bit of history. I didn't go into too much in depth, but I hope it kind of gives you a little history of country music, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Tune in next time to Jacob's Talk and see what I talk about next. Thank you all for listening.